Chapter 4:18. As soon as Wu Ming finished speaking, the demon's tentacles stopped as if it was stunned. Then, a blue transparent substance began to appear on the body of the giant demon. It was ice. In just a second, the demonic seed turned into a lifelike ice sculpture. This made Ivan, who was about to self-destruct, stunned as he stared blankly at the demon that was already very close to him. At such a close distance, Ivan could even feel the cold air coming from the ice sculpture. What's going on? Ivan asked in a trembling voice. Ivan! Get out of there! There are people of other races here. At this time, Rieker shouted at Ivan and then ran toward Ivan with O'Ray. Ivan was reminded and immediately calmed down as he hurried to meet up with Rieker and O'Ray. The three of them were in a state of alert as they looked around. The reason why Rieker and O'Ray came back was because of the strength of the enemy. The enemy was a powerhouse who could instantly freeze the demon, so escaping was impossible. Therefore, Rieker and O'Ray chose to meet up with Ivan. Rieker, what do we do now? O'Ray gulped and asked nervously. Don't act rashly for now. Since the other party didn't choose to attack us but chose to attack the demon, it means that they are not hostile to us. Leader Rieker calmly analyzed. Although that was what he said, Rieker's hand was still on his dagger. After all, although the other party could be said to be Ivan's savior, but in this era, there were also people who first gave people hope and then gave people despair, so they must not be careless. Because in this era, carelessness meant death. It's all my fault, Rick. If I could have detonated it earlier, maybe you could have taken the opportunity to escape. Ivan said to Rick with some self-blame, still keeping his vigilant eyes on the surroundings. Don't say that, Ivan. Even if you detonated the material room and bought us time, don't forget that the other party can instantly freeze a demon of this size. If they really wanted to kill us, I don't think we could outrun such a powerhouse. Rieker said calmly as he continued to look around vigilantly. That's true, Ivan. Maybe the other party actually wants to save you so that we can leave safely. That way, you can meet Nana. O'Ray's face was filled with joy and hope as he pretended to be calm and said to Ivan. By the way, Nong Na was Ivan's daughter. Wu Ming, who was hiding in the dark, was amused. He had to admit that a naive human like O'Ray could actually survive in this era. Even Wu Ming, after knowing the current information of this world, had already realized that this was a race war. Wu Ming still understood the principle that those who were not of his race would have different intentions. Not to mention, humans were a race that was ignored by other powerful races. O'Ray was truly naive to say such a thing. Don't be silly, O'Ray. Rieker scolded. The other party didn't do anything to us because we're still useful. No one would save us humans. You know that, right? Rick's words shamed O'Ray to the core. O'Ray understood that, but he still hoped that someone would come to save them. But Rieker, didn't you think the same before? A god that can create humans. O'Ray's voice became softer and softer until he stopped talking. Humans don't have a god. We humans have to rely on ourselves. Rieker glanced at O'Ray and continued to look around vigilantly. Rieker, that person hasn't appeared yet. What's going on? Ivan voiced out his confusion. That's right. Ever since the demon was frozen, Rieker, O'Ray, and Ivan had met up and looked around vigilantly. Even now, that person still hadn't appeared. Now that you mention it, it seems that's true. O'Ray also realized that something was wrong after hearing Ivan's words. Rieker naturally noticed the problem, but Rieker thought that the other party was just putting on airs and putting on a show, so he didn't care. However, it had been so long, and the other party still hadn't appeared. That wasn't right. Did he leave? This thought popped up in O'Ray and Ivan's minds. As the leader, Rieker naturally understood what the two of them were thinking, so Rieker, Ivan, and O'Ray had the same idea. But let's wait and see. We can't be careless. Although Rieker was confused, he didn't believe that the other party would leave just like that. He continued to be in a stalemate. No race would play with humans so excessively. Other races that saw humans as ants and mice, although there were times when they played with humans, it was impossible for them to take so long. It was the same logic as how a person couldn't play with 3 insects that were smaller than ants for an entire day. No exceptions. Hiding in the dark, Huberic looked at Wu Ming in confusion. Question, why don't you go down and meet them? Faced with Huberic's question, Wu Ming, who was deep in thought, came back to his senses. Why don't I go down and meet them? I was going to meet them, but I've changed my mind now. The reason why Wu Ming said that was because Riker and the others were wary of non-humans. For a long time, the humans in this world had entered an unusually vigilant state because of their desire to survive. Listening to their conversation, it seemed that Riker was a leader-like figure. As a leader, Riker was more vigilant than ordinary humans. To put it simply, it was because humans had been oppressed and hurt for a long time, causing humans to be unusually nervous. As the leader of the entire race, Riker shouldered a heavy burden that others couldn't imagine. Therefore, Riker was more distrustful of other races than others and more vigilant. In that case, if I go up and say, "I'm here to help you," it will definitely have the opposite effect, Wu Ming said bluntly. I don't understand. Then what should Nameless do next? Huberic asked. After thinking for a moment, Wu Ming looked at Riker and the other two with a smile on his face. Since the other party is so vigilant, then I'll be a god and play with them. Huberic looked at Wu Ming's smile, tilted his head, and data flowed in his eyes. Nameless, my database shows that your current smile is called a bad taste. How can that be? Cough cough. You still don't understand the heart. You'll understand the true meaning of this smile after you understand the heart. Yes, that's right. Huberic nodded as if he understood. Next, it was time to show his acting skills. Chapter 419. Just as Rick was wondering if the other party had really left, a voice came from the void. Nice to meet you, human. This was Wu Ming changing his voice through magic. The entire space felt like it had fallen into a swamp, making the three of them feel quite heavy. The ancient and deep voice came into their ears. The three of them became even more alert. After hearing this voice, O'Ray and Ivan's body shook, which was a sign of excessive nervousness. Rick, on the other hand, was still in shock, looking around cautiously. Let me introduce myself. I am a god, and I don't come from this world. Another world? Ivan and O'Ray looked at each other and exclaimed, Another world. Rick frowned. Regardless of whether the other party was lying or not, one thing was for sure, and that was the other party's information was unknown. Because he didn't know the other party's identity, he couldn't come up with a plan. I can only rely on the conversation to analyze. Rick thought in his heart. That's right. Another world. For some reason, I came to this world and met you by accident. The deep voice continued. Then, Lord Unknown God, why do you want to save us? Is it purely out of kindness? Rick asked. However, his question sounded like an interrogative question. Hey, Rick. Ivan and O'Ray looked at Rick nervously. Rick was supposed to be the most cautious one, but now he was the most reckless one. However, Rick did this for a reason. With his super advanced observation skills, Rick was able to glean some information from Wu Ming's words. This was a god who was not easily angered. Ha ha ha, as expected of the leader of the humans. Even if I said that I just wanted to help you, you wouldn't believe me. Wu Ming laughed. Ivan and Ol were stunned, while Rick's lips curled into a smile. That's right. I have a purpose. Wu Ming's words made Ivan and O'Ray's body tense up. After all, even if he was from another world, he was still a god. Leader of the humans, Rick, I want to make a bet with you. Rick frowned when he heard this. What bet? Rick asked bluntly. I'll bet on the possibility of being human. Rick felt as if he had been struck by lightning. His body trembled slightly and his pupils contracted. Possibility? Ivan and O'Ray, on the other hand, looked confused. Then, why are you betting on the possibility of humans with me? Rick asked in a heavy tone. In the world I live in, I am the guardian god who protects humanity. Do you understand? Wu Ming explained. Rick's pupils contracted again, and then he smiled. Is it possible for humans? Although Wu Ming was wearing a mask, he could sense that Rick's smile contained a lot of meaning. Sadness, joy, excitement, dissatisfaction. Almost all positive and negative emotions were contained within. How about it? Do you want to bet? The bet is that the winner can order the loser once. Any kind of order. What do you think? Wu Ming continued asking. I'll bet with you. Rick answered Wu Ming with unprecedented enthusiasm. Ha ha ha, very good. Leader of the humans, Rick. I look forward to your actions. After that, the heavy pressure on the three disappeared. The god left. Hey, Rick. Is it really a good idea to make such a rash decision? Ivan and O'Ray looked at Rick worriedly. Although this unknown god gave off a harmless feeling, they should still be cautious. After all, Rick was their leader. If something were to happen to him, what would they do? Don't worry, I will win. Rick looked at Ivan and O'Ray. Ivan and O'Ray looked into Rick's eyes and were stunned. This pair of eyes contained an unprecedented light, filled with faith and hope. It was as if Rick had become a completely different person. By the way, what is the possibility of being human? O'Ray was completely confused. That guy is surprisingly emotional, Rick said, baffled. Huh. Ivan and O'Ray looked at each other, even more confused. Think about it, that guy is a god from another world who protects the humans, and the humans under his protection live a happy life. But when they come to this world, they find that the humans here are so weak. If it were you, what would you do, O'Ray? Oh, Rickety asked. If it were me, I would be very unhappy and would want to change the situation. It was like a certain country. The people of that country were living very well in their own country, but one day, they went abroad and found that their countrymen were being targeted by others. Their lives were very miserable. Naturally, their first reaction would be very unhappy. That god is the same. He can't stand the humans being so depraved, so he wants to change the situation. The possibility of being human is the key. Ivan and O'Ray still didn't quite understand, but... Well, it's all up to you, Rick. We don't understand this. Ivan looked helpless. That's right, that's right. As long as it's Rick, I believe you can win. O'Ray looked at Rick like a fanboy. Let's go, Ivan. O'Ray. Let's go realize our possibility. Oh. Then the three of them left. Wuming's Huberic's figure walked out from the side. I don't understand. The possibility of being human is not recorded in the database. Huberic thought about this as he listened to the conversation between Wuming and Rick. When you have a heart, you will naturally know. You don't need to think about it. Wuming touched Huberic's head and said casually. Huberic nodded as if he didn't fully understand. Then, Huberic asked another question. Question, nameless. Is it God? Or is it acting? Huberic tilted his head and looked at Wuming. Ah, you mean that? It's not completely acting. After all, I really did bless the humans and was worshipped as a god by them. Wuming thought of the Yurok people. But compared to being a god, I prefer to be a traveler. The world is too big. It's impossible to finish walking, Wuming said with a smile. God, traveler, bless humans. Huberic muttered the key words. No one knew what he was thinking. That human named Rick is very good. I'm going to give you to him and stay by his side. I believe you will understand the heart. Huberic nodded again as if he understood. Then, Wuming looked outside. Outside, the elven skeleton continued to deepen. Three figures were moving quickly in a certain direction. The environment continued to deteriorate, but the possibility of being human was being excavated little by little. Do your best, humans. Chapter 4:20. Rick went back with hope in his heart. Wuming and Hubletus quietly followed behind Rick and the others. What a joke. It was not easy to meet humans. It would be a huge loss if they did not follow them to figure out where the humans gathered. It had to be said that Rick and the others were really cautious. Wuming discovered that the place where he met Rick and the others was very far from their base. This was probably also for survival. If they were targeted by other races and needed to be sacrificed, they would not expose the hiding places of other humans. They came to a cave and watched Rick and the others walk in. Wuming speculated that this might be their base. Find a place to hide. Don't run around. I'll go in and take a look, Wuming instructed Hubletus. Wuming got Hubletus to hide and wait for him. Then, Wuming entered the cave in spirit form and followed Rick and the others. Ahem. After all, spirit form was quite practical. Moreover, Wuming's current body was created by himself, so he could naturally add extra small abilities at will. Spirit form, which could only be used by spirits, was easily done by Wuming with the help of the power of the origin and Wuming's understanding of spirit form. After all, the origin was the origin of everything. The reason why he did not add other abilities was that they were not powers that Wuming was familiar with. Adding them was quite troublesome, and even if he added them, he would not be used to them. Moreover, even if those super powerful abilities were added to this body, they would not be much stronger. Even Wu Ming's original abilities had been weakened, let alone other abilities. Therefore, Wu Ming only added spirit form to his body, and everything else was the same as his original body. Inside the cave, there was a long tunnel without any light, except for the torches that Rick and the others were holding. The top of the torch was not a flame, but a stone tied to it. This was a stone unique to this world. As long as it came into contact with water, the stone would absorb the water and emit light. It was very practical. The three of them each held a torch, as they walked through the seemingly long tunnel. Rick, who was walking at the front of the cave, seemed to have sensed something. He instantly turned his head and looked at the tunnel behind him. "What's wrong, Rick?" Ivan and Oren, who were following behind Rick, didn't seem to want to answer. Rick took another long look into the dark tunnel. "I'm fine. Let's go." He gradually landed behind Ivan and Oren, looking back from time to time. Gradually, the three of them went further and further away, leaving only the light of the torches. This is really surprising. Is it a sixth sense, or is it just a simple sense of vigilance? Wu Ming's voice rang out calmly. Wu Ming was still in his spirit form. Wu Ming once again cast a large number of concealment spells on himself before he felt at ease and followed Rick. Coming to the end of the tunnel, Wu Ming heard someone shout out these words excitedly. Wu Ming passed through the wall. Through his perception and eyes, Wu Ming saw the place where humans lived. This was a super-wide natural underground cave, but there were also signs of artificial modification. Countless colorful glowing stones decorated this natural karst cave, and in some places there was even land, with some grains that Wu Ming did not recognize growing on it. All kinds of humans were busy. Some were managing the land with grains, some were managing the terraced fields, and some were collecting water through special means. The houses were built directly on the mountain, making use of the independent space of the karst caves. This was a simple room, and there was even a stable that was used as a means of transportation. The humans lived in an orderly manner, almost like a small society. At the spot where Rick and the other two were, there were people who took away their item backpacks. A rose-haired girl hugged Rick, looking very worried. "Daddy!" At this time, a young voice was heard. A purple-haired girl ran towards the three of them and rushed into the arms of the uncle named Ivan. "Oh! Nong Na, did you listen to your big sister crone?" Ivan hugged Nana lovingly and asked with a smile. "Aha! Nong Na is very obedient to big sister crone. Nong Na also knows how to write Nong Na's name. Look, Nong Na wrote it herself." Nana said as she picked up the unknown paper in her hand and showed it to Ivan. "Oh, haha, as expected of my daughter, you can write your own name. Daddy is proud of you." Ivan smiled from the bottom of his heart and stroked Nana's head. He, Nana laughed happily. Seeing this scene, Rick's heart was filled with uneasiness and shame. If it wasn't for the god who came in time, Nana probably wouldn't be able to see her father again. Rick lowered his head in self-blame. "Rick, what happened?" The rose-haired girl frowned as she looked at Rick, who had his head lowered. It seemed like a lot of things happened. "It's okay, Crone." Rick shook his head and looked at Crone with fighting spirit in his eyes. "Really? I told you to call me sister." "Well, forget it. Being able to return safely is better than anything else. Welcome back, Rick." Crone looked at Rick with displeasure at first, then her expression relaxed and she smiled at Rick. "Yes, I'm back, Crone." Seeing this scene, Wu Ming nodded with satisfaction. Saving that human named Ivan wasn't in vain. Wu Ming in spirit form nodded with satisfaction. Then he didn't look at Rick and the others anymore. Instead, he left the place and went outside to meet up with Xiaofan. On the top of a slightly higher mountain nearby, Wu Ming and Xiaofan looked into the distance. "Hey Xiaofan, I think you should enter the lives of these humans," Wu Ming said without turning his head. Answer: Xiaofan has been abandoned by the Kikai race. How to deal with him is the power of the current owner of Xiaofan, nameless, Xiaofan said calmly. "Your words are quite ambiguous. I'm not your master. Remember, no one can be the master of others, not even you, the Kikai race, because you are a race that is about to have a heart." Understand. Can't. Data flowed in Xiaofan's eyes as he stuttered this sentence. "Well, You won't understand even if I tell you now. When you have a heart, you will understand without a teacher. Wuming smiled as he stroked Xiaofar's head. Wuming firmly believed that after living with humans for a period of time and with Wuming's guidance, Xiaofan would be able to understand a heart and have feelings. Because letting machines have feelings was one of the possibilities for humans. Chapter 421. Because of his bet with Wuming, after a few days, Rick didn't continue to stay in the base. Instead, he chose to continue collecting information. Perhaps because he didn't want anyone else to die, Rick didn't bring anyone else with him this time. Instead, he rode a horse-like means of transportation raised by humans and took the first step to prove the possibility of humans. Wuming and Hablitus naturally followed after seeing Rick leave. This is a great opportunity to send you into human life through Rick, Wuming said. Not only that, but Wuming was also curious about where Rick was going next. In this era where one could die if they weren't careful, it was impossible for humans like Rick to go out without prepared information. Flying in the sky, Wuming looked at the fully armed Rick with his superhuman vision, as well as the bags of food and water hanging from the beasts that functioned like horses. He easily deduced that Rick was going somewhere far away. A means of transportation for long-distance travel and at least 5 days of dry food and water. It didn't look like he was going for a casual stroll. Rick stopped moving forward and looked behind him vigilantly, making a puzzled sound. But it was obvious that he didn't find anything, so Rick continued on his way. He's quite vigilant, Wuming said while flying in the sky and relying on the concealment technique. Wuming and Hablitus relied on the concealment technique to fly in the sky from the beginning. Not to mention Rick, even other races might not be able to discover Wuming and Hablitus who were concealed by Wuming's technique. It seemed that in this era, not being vigilant would really lead to death. This time, Wuming was extra careful. He and Hablitus flew at a higher altitude and followed behind Rick. After following Rick for almost half a day, Rick finally stopped changing his route and began to accelerate towards a certain place at full speed. Because the Earth had become the battlefield of various races, Rick kept changing his route. Perhaps it was because Rick had never been to his destination before, so he kept looking for the best route and marking it on the map. Wuming asked Xiaofan as he watched Rick move in this direction at the fastest speed possible. Is there anything noteworthy in this direction? Wuming asked out of curiosity. After all, Rick didn't seem to know how to change directions. Data flowed through Huberic's yellow eyes, which were like warning lines, before he opened his mouth to answer Wuming. Answer: Xiaofar's database shows that ahead is the abandoned old capital of the Forest Elves, Marilyn. Oh, Wuming was intrigued. According to the intel, the Forest Elves and Goblins were sworn enemies, and Rick's destination this time was likely to be the former capital of the Forest Elves. In addition, Rick had found some good intel from the Goblins' crashed magic airship, so Wuming felt that Rick's target was the former capital of the Forest Elves, Marilyn. As the saying goes, the one who knows you best is your enemy, so it was normal to have information about your sworn enemy. Therefore, Wuming wasn't surprised that Rick had found information about the Forest Elves from the Goblins' crashed magic airship. I'm slightly interested in that place. Wuming's lips curled up. After all, even if it was an abandoned old capital, it was still the glory of the Forest Elves. It was like a gorgeous ruin that hid secrets. Let's go take a look in advance, Xiaofan. What do you think? Wuming asked Xiaofan. Answer: Xiaofan doesn't care. Everything will be decided by John Doe, Xiaofan said calmly. That won't do, Xiaofan. You have to learn how to think and ask questions. It's because humans know how to think that they can survive the war with other races. This is the prerequisite for you to obtain a heart, Xiaofan, Wuming said to Xiaofan as he shook his head calmly. After Xiaofan heard Wuming's words, the data in his eyes flowed again. After a few seconds, Xiaofan nodded. Understood. Xiaofan. I understand. Xiaofan nodded. Then, what do you think about us going to take a look first? Wuming repeated his question. I agree. Xiaofan isn't interested in the former capital of the Forest Elves. However, since John Doe wants to go, Xiaofan will accompany him. Xiaofan looked into Wuming's eyes and said seriously. Although Xiaofan seemed to be a little dependent on Wuming, Wuming felt that Xiaofar's current state was already very good. Then, let's go take a look first. Please lead the way for me. Ming looked at Xiaofan with a smile. Xiaofan looked at Ming's smile and nodded. Then, two meteors streaked across the sky. Because of the increase in altitude, Rick didn't notice that something was wrong and continued to move forward at full speed. However, even if Rick was riding a vehicle, it was still too slow for Ming and Xiaofan. About 10 seconds later, Ming saw a dilapidated city. Ming and Xiaofan landed in front of the old capital of the Forest Elves, Merlin, and walked in through the gap. It was attacked, right? No wonder it was abandoned. Ming looked at the traces of destruction inside Merlin. It was obviously not the power of nature, but man-made. Answer. According to the records in the database, this place was attacked by the Skywing species, Xiaofan said calmly as he followed behind Ming. Skywing species? No wonder it was destroyed like this, Ming said knowingly. It could be said that the buildings in Merlin were basically destroyed, and there was no complete building at all. I'm afraid Rick will be very disappointed if he comes. After all, there was no doubt that Rick's purpose was to search for information, and it was unlikely that there would be any information in Merlin that had been destroyed, unless the forest elves used magic to protect the information. Then, Ming saw a complete sea of flowers filled with elves. There was no doubt that this place was protected by the forest elves' magic. There really is a place protected by magic. Ming and Xiaofan walked over. Places protected by magic are usually the forest elves' treasure troves, laboratories, and other valuable places. Xiaofan explained to Ming as he followed Ming to the center of the flower bed. Are you saying that we've caught a big fish? Ming's lips curled into a smile. Then, Ming used magic to open the door on the floor. Want to take a look together, Xiaofan? The reason why Ming sent an invitation to Hubrik was because there might be a trap below, which represented danger. Agreed. Xiaofan will work with John Doe. Then Ming and Xiaofan walked down the exposed stairs and went underground. The laboratory-like scene entered Ming's eyes. Chapter 422. Ming saw a laboratory-like scene full of forest elves technology. There was a huge mainframe that looked like a human brain wrapped in purple glowing vines, as well as several giant pillars engraved with a large number of flashing purple tactics. There was also a screen-like display on the ground with a large number of forest elves' words reflected on it. The entire space was immersed in purple. Hint, this is likely to be the development site of the forest elves' new weapons, Hubrik said to Ming as he looked at the giant pillar engraved with mysterious runes. Can't Hubrik understand these runes? Ming asked. The runes of Canas are not in Hubrik's database. Hubrik shook his head. In this regard, Ming did not show any disappointment. Ming had almost guessed it. Walking forward and coming to the screen on the ground, Ming infused it with magic power. The entire room lit up, and all the instruments began to operate. Seeing such a scene, Hubrik was puzzled. Puzzled, why can John Doe reactivate the instruments powered by elves? Hubrik, who followed Ming, now knew that Ming, who came from another world, did not have any elves in his body. Logically speaking, he should not be able to use the instruments of this world. Ming smiled slightly at Hubrik's question. It's considered my own ability. In the beginning, after Ming sensed that there was no magic power in this world, Ming was indeed unable to use magic and spells that required magic power. However, the energy elves of this world were also products of the Big Root. Therefore Ming, who was of the same origin as the Big Root, could also be said to have the ability to use elves. It was not difficult for Ming to use the elves floating in the atmosphere, but it was a little troublesome. After Ming adapted to the power system of this world and found that he could act as a sprite of this world through the magic power in his body, Ming began to use the almost infinite magic power in his body. Well, this body didn't have unlimited mana. Although this body was created based on Ming's original body, it couldn't imitate the characteristics of the root dragon. However, it had enough mana. To put it simply, the energy I possess can be of use to this world. It's that simple. Ming stopped looking at Hubrik, who was nodding his head like he didn't understand. He started to study the host. On the large screen, countless words and a large number of unknown formulas appeared. Logically speaking, Ming shouldn't be able to understand them. But now, Ming was concentrating on reading. Ming knew that this world was different from the world he was familiar with. Therefore, after getting familiar with Hubrik, Ming asked Huberic to teach Ming the various languages of this world. Huberic, who had a database, naturally knew most of the languages. In addition, Huberic was now Ming's main focus, so Huberic easily taught Ming all the languages he could teach. Ming didn't disappoint Huberic's teaching and quickly learned most of it. Therefore, Ming could still understand the languages of ordinary races, such as the language of the forest elves on the screen. The Zeroth Void Blessing Theory Verification Experimental Furnace. Ming read out the name of the experiment. Ming couldn't even understand the name of the experiment personnel, let alone the name of the experiment. Ciphertext? Ming could more or less guess why he couldn't understand it. After all, it was a new weapon experiment, so the experiment content should naturally use ciphertext. However, deciphering these ciphertexts was only a matter of time for the Kikai race Huberic. Huberic, come and help me. After hearing the call, Huberic, who was still looking at the mysterious giant pillar, walked toward Ming. And as if Huberic's arrival had triggered some mechanism, the purple vine wrapped around the Cortex Prime instantly glowed, and countless light swords appeared out of thin air. A trap? A defensive tactic? Ming looked at the light swords that were already flying toward the two of them. Ming could sense that there were a large number of elves in these light swords, and they were likely to explode if they hit the target. Thou hast violated the contract and brought evil to the world. Lord's Day. Sinners shall be punished. Shatter their backs, dig out their tendons, bones, hair, and brains, and trample on their blood and mud. If I am one who cannot be approached by darkness, I will obey the words of the Lord and destroy thee. After reciting the words, a purplish-black fog appeared around Ming's body. Ming's heart needle pointed in the direction of 5 o'clock, and the stone plate that represented annihilation lit up. The purplish-black fog instantly attacked the light swords, and in an instant, it was as if the purplish-black fog had devoured them. These light swords didn't even make a sound, let alone explode. Annihilation theoretically could devour and destroy everything, as long as Ming knew how to use it. Immediately after, Ming once again controlled the purplish-black fog to suddenly attack Huberic. Huberic looked at Ming in confusion, but he didn't resist. Instantly, the Cortex Prime emitted light and touched the purplish-black fog that enveloped Huberic, but the purplish-black fog instantly eroded the light. As expected, the experimental furnace has been activated, Ming said knowingly. Ming stopped injecting magic power into the apparatus, and immediately after, the brain-like experimental furnace dimmed as if it had run out of energy. This was like a laptop. After taking advantage of the situation for a long time, the computer ran out of battery. Even if it was connected to a power source, if the power was immediately cut off, the computer would quickly run out of power. Are you okay, Huberic? Ming removed the mist of annihilation and asked Huberic. Huberic shook his head. The reason Ming had enveloped Huberic with the mist of annihilation was that Ming had deduced that Huberic was likely to be attacked. This was the laboratory, and it was Huberic who had activated those defensive spell light swords when he approached, so Ming believed that Huberic would definitely be attacked. Thus, he used the mist of annihilation to envelop Huberic. Sure enough, although the light just swept past Ming, it seemed to only target Huberic. If one were to talk about the biggest difference between Ming and Huberic, it would be the energy in their bodies. Ming's energy was magic power, while Huberic's energy was elven, so Ming guessed that this weapon was likely to be an existence that targeted elves as a mid-tier force. I've almost guessed the principle of this thing, but to fully understand it, I still need your decryption. Ming stroked his chin and looked at the experimental furnace. Looking at the time, Rick should be here soon. I'll go meet him. You can stay here and help with the analysis. There's no danger anymore, Ming said to Huberic. If it was just one person, Ming could show himself. After all, he couldn't keep sending messages through the void. Understood, Huberic replied. Right. Ming, who was walking toward the entrance, turned his head and looked at Huberic. I was protecting you just now. This is also a manifestation of the heart. After that, Ming left the room, leaving behind Huberic, whose eyes were constantly revolving with data. Protect the power of the heart. Chapter 423. Ming left Huberic in the lab after confirming that there was no longer any danger. He then went out of the underground lab and arrived at the entrance of Melon City. As expected, Ming found Rick already there. Rick found a safe place to hide his mount and then began to explore the old city. Although it was called an exploration, in reality, the houses here had basically collapsed. Rick had come this time hoping for a fluke. Even if it was an abandoned old city, it was still the old city of the forest elves. It was unlikely that they would leave anything behind. At this time, Rick also discovered that these places were destroyed by humans. This kind of destructive power doesn't seem like it's from the goblins. Sky wings, Rick judged. It had to be said that as the leader of the humans, Rick had mastered a lot of abilities. Strong vigilance, extremely calm mentality, disguise, deceit, numbing oneself, and the cruelty of sacrificing the small to save the big, as well as the characteristics, strengths, weaknesses, and abilities of each race. Although it was not comprehensive, Rick had collected most of it. Rick did not have any extraordinary talents or abilities, but as a leader who led the other humans to live in this annoying era, these were all necessary. If he did not master these, he would not be able to survive. Simply put, he was forced. No one was willing to be born to deceive and suspect others, and Rick was the same. And the reason why Wu Ming knew this was because Wu Ming had seen it the last time they met. From the beginning, when Rick, Ivan, and Wu Ming came on the Goblin's fallen magic airship to saving Ivan and leaving after talking to the three of them, Rick's performance as the leader was seen by Wu Ming. Wu Ming could only say that Rick was not the best leader, but Rick was the most suitable leader to lead the other humans in this era. After Rick checked the buildings that were not intact, he quickly searched for any strange places. Soon, he discovered the Sea of Flowers and the underground passage that had been opened. Someone has been here? Could it be the forest elves? Rick was shocked. After all, under such circumstances it was unlikely. No, it was impossible for humans to come here. Compared to other races, it was very likely that the forest elves would return to retrieve the materials that they did not manage to take away in time. Don't worry, there are no forest elite species coming. Suddenly, a young man's voice was heard. Rick immediately pulled out the dagger at his waist and turned towards the source of the sound. Rick saw a man wearing a black cloak with a hood. The fat cloak covered the man's entire body, and his hands were hidden in the cloak. Even his body was not exposed. Rick could only vaguely see the man's heels at the bottom of the cloak that was about to touch the ground. The wide hood basically covered the person's face. His hair, eyes, nose, and other body parts could not be seen. The only things that could be seen were his mouth, chin, and the voice just now. It was impossible to tell what race he was from. However, Rick's attire was similar to his opponent's. He wore a hooded cloak that covered half of his body, a pair of thick goggles that covered his eyes, and a scarf-like cloth that covered his mouth. Only his calves and hands were exposed, and Rick held a dagger that shone with a cold light in his hand. Who are you? Rick's previous panic seemed to be fake. He instantly adjusted himself and coldly asked the person who had come. Rick did not notice the man's arrival. If the man did not speak, Rick would not even know that there was someone behind him. To be more specific, the man in front of Rick gave him a sense of illusion. If he did not see him with his eyes, it was as if the man did not exist. There was no breath at all. The man was, of course, Wu Ming, who cast a lot of shielding magic on himself. There was no breath because of the effect of magic. Why don't you recognize me? Then how about this? When Wu Ming said the last three words, he used magic to change his voice. His voice immediately became the voice that Rick was familiar with. He had seen him a few days ago. The god from the other world? Rick was shocked at first, but then he calmed down and put the dagger back into the scabbard at his waist. Why? Are you not afraid that I will hurt you? Wu Ming said to Rick with his original voice. There is no need for that. According to the rules of this world, you are a type of god. Even the weakest type of god is not something that a mere human can deal with, Rick continued after a pause. Moreover, even if you are a member of any other race, you are stronger than humans in terms of fighting. If you want to kill me, I will not be able to stop you. What Rick meant was that no matter who the man was, he could not defeat or defend against his attacks. Moreover, the man would not kill him, so there was no need for him to defend himself. Moreover, you actually want to help humans, Lord God from the other world. Rick took off the blindfold, the cloth that acted as a mask, and the hood, and looked at Wu Ming. Oh, why do you think so? Is it because I said that I am a god that protects humans in my world? Wu Ming asked. However, Rick shook his head without hesitation. Of course not. I am not stupid enough to believe the words of an unknown person. Rick showed a proud expression. However, you still made a bet with me, who is unknown and has insufficient information. Wu Ming's words were like a sharp knife that pierced Rick's heart. Rick stood there awkwardly. I promised you to protect Ivan and all. It was an expedient measure, ahaha. Rick touched the back of his head and laughed awkwardly. However, there is no reason to reject a bet between men. Am I right, Lord God? But in an instant, Rick regained his cold expression. In fact, even if Rick did not say it, Wu Ming understood. For someone like Rick, how could he not understand the meaning of Wu Ming's words? Whether it was Wu Ming saving Ivan, or the conversation with Rick, Rick felt the goodwill of Wu Ming. However, as Rick said, how could he easily believe the words of an unknown person? Let's assume that if Wu Ming was planning to deceive Rick and others, then as long as they followed Wu Ming's intentions, they would be fine. And if Rick did not bet with Wu Ming, then it was likely that Wu Ming, who wanted to deceive Rick and others, would be angry. If he could not achieve his goal, these humans would be useless. Then Wu Ming, an unknown person, would likely have this idea to directly eliminate Rick and others. Therefore, Rick chose to bet with him. As if knowing that Wu Ming already knew his thoughts, Riker went on to say, in fact, there is a more important reason why I bet with you, and that is the content of the bet, the possibility of humans. Chapter 424. The possibility of humans was an extremely vague statement. The definition of possibility referred to the probability of something happening. It was a quantitative indicator that predicted the development of something. It was an objective proof, not a subjective proof. But the possibility of humans, which aspect did it refer to, or all of them? One had to know that the more confusing the contents of the bet, the higher the chance of winning. The question of the possibility of humans had many meanings, but both Wu Ming and Rick had the same idea. You want to bet on the future of humans, right, Lord God? Rick stared at Wu Ming. I don't know if you didn't want to hide it or purposely revealed it, but your intentions are too obvious. It's so obvious that even I want to suspect you. Rick smiled as if he was talking to an old friend that he hadn't seen in years. But, you still made the bet with me, didn't you? Wu Ming said directly. Ah, you're right. Rick closed his eyes. No matter how suspicious Wu Ming was, no matter how dangerous Wu Ming was, no matter how numb Rick was, no matter how scared Rick was, this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Humans that are not valued, humans that are ignored by other races, humans without power. I really want to see their expressions of anger after their plans are ruined by humans. Ha ha ha. Rick seemed to have thought of something happy as he laughed happily. Rick didn't know how to end this war, and he didn't have the power to end this war. But collecting information and waiting for an opportunity to come was the way of the weak. And Wu Ming was one of the opportunities. Because of Wu Ming's bet, Rick woke up from his numbness of, let humans live. Just because he was weak, he couldn't interfere with the strong? Stop joking. Even if I'm weak, I want to prove to you the possibility of humans. Rick stopped laughing and looked at Wu Ming with fighting spirit. Clap, clap, clap. Wu Ming clapped his hands. You've really impressed me, Rick. Seeing that the leader of humans had such fighting spirit, Wu Ming felt that there was hope to change the world. Then let me tell you how to end this war. Wu Ming took off his hood and looked at him. Now, humans had grasped the future. Because the god spirits were not satisfied with being on the same level as other gods, the gods began to fight with other gods. Countless races created by the gods also began to fight with the gods. The elven corridor had answered the wishes of the gods to make this planet the place where they were born. Thus, something called the Celestial Cup appeared. Star Cup? Rick asked doubtfully. Rick and Wu Ming walked down the stairs of the underground laboratory. Wu Ming explained the story. Ah, that's right. It's the Star Cup. Wu Ming narrowed his eyes and continued to explain. Only when the gods of this planet decided on the strongest person would the Star Cup appear from the elven corridor underground. The strongest person who obtained the Star Cup would become the only god. In other words, these thousands of years of war were actually because of the selfish desires of the gods. Rick fell silent. Because of the selfish desires of the strong, human families were destroyed. They were not valued and were trampled on. They were even treated as food, test subjects, and laborers. I don't think I'll forgive those people. Rick shouted slightly crazily. He hammered the steel wall beside him with one hand. Traces of blood flowed from Rick's hand that he did not remove from the wall. Wuming cast a few healing Lune runes and Rick's hand was healed. This is the law of the jungle. The strong decide everything, and the weak can only accept it, Wuming said calmly. And often, the weak that the strong do not pay attention to will be killed. There were countless examples of the weak defeating the strong. Therefore, Wuming would not underestimate anyone. Even if he looked down on them, he would take them seriously in his heart. By the way, aren't you afraid that I'll think that you want to use us humans to help you obtain the Star Cup by telling me all this? Rick looked at Wuming. However, Wuming just shook his head calmly. There's no need for that, Wuming said calmly. Firstly, I'm a god from another world. Whether I can use the Star Cup of this world or whether I have the right to obtain it is still unknown. Secondly, I'm very strong, Wuming said as he looked into Rick's eyes. Perhaps you might think that I'm a little arrogant, but according to the information I've obtained, in this world, in terms of combat power, only the creator of the Sky Wing race, Arthas, who is known as the god of war, can fight me. Wuming's words shocked Rick. Rick had some understanding of Arthas. The god who created the Skywing race was said to have the strongest power among all the gods. He was the strongest god of war who had killed other gods with a god-slaying weapon he created. Hey, are you for real? Are you that strong? Rick looked at Wuming with an extremely shocked gaze. Although Rick also knew that Wuming was not weak and was very likely a powerful god, he could not help but be shocked that Wuming could fight with Arthas, the creator of the god-slaying weapon. Then I'm really sorry. I'm that strong. Wuming half-jokingly shrugged helplessly and continued to walk down the stairs to the basement. The reason why Wuming said that was because of Wuming's speculation. Back then, Wuming had asked the dragon spirit what rank it was in this world. The dragon spirit half-weakly said that it was almost on par with the strongest god, Arthas. Of course, Wuming did not easily believe the one-sided words of the dragon spirit. After that, Wuming asked for some other information, such as the strength of the dragon spirit and the strength of the Kikai race. After becoming familiar with Habletus, Wuming also asked Habletus about it. The database shows that the dragon spirit doesn't lie. They are a race that purely respects the strong. This was Habletus's original words. Speaking of which, Habletus also told Wuming some information about the dragon spirit. It could use its past and future power in the present, manipulate time and space, and transfer injuries to the past or future. It could be said that it was extremely difficult to deal with. The dragon spirit whose bones were broken by Wuming's punch was defeated because it underestimated the enemy and fought head-on with Wuming's giant incarnation. The reason why the dragon spirit did not transfer its injuries to the past or future was actually because of the law of the jungle. However, Wuming always felt that the other party was afraid that he would punch him again, so he gave in. Thinking about it, if the dragon spirit seed got up again, with the situation at that time, Wuming was likely to give the dragon spirit seed another punch. Not everyone could block a phoenix and a giant. In short, Wuming inferred from the information that only Arthas could match him. Let's not talk about this for now. We found something good down here. Let's take a look together. With that, Wuming walked away. You guys. Rick muttered this word. Does he have companions? Rick shook his head and stopped thinking about it. He followed Wuming's footsteps and came to the laboratory. Chapter 425. This is. Rieker looked at the scene in the underground laboratory and said in shock. It wasn't that Rieker was excited when he saw the scene in the underground laboratory, but because of the current state of Xiaofan. As everyone knew, Xiaofan was a Mecha-Kai species and could continuously evolve. The Mecha-Kai species evolved from the 5 small square boxes. And now, Xiaofan's appearance just happened to prove the theory of evolution. Xiaofan's petite body floated in the spacious laboratory. Countless cable-like data lines appeared from the body behind Xiaofan's hair, connecting to the brain-like mainframe in the laboratory. Several large screens appeared in front of Xiaofan. Data flowed on them, all of which were data that Wuming and Rieker couldn't understand. There was no doubt that Xiaofan's was analyzing the content of the Zeroth protection of the void. These cables and other things were actually evolved. According to what Xiaofan's told Wuming, if Xiaofan's was completely liberated, he could rely on himself to form a high-tech attack spaceship like a battleship. According to Xiaofan, those were all evolved. Although Wuming was very curious about how Xiaofan's body contained so many things, he could almost guess that it was nothing more than an independent space like Wuming's golden ripples. Kikai species. What's going on? Rieker looked at Wuming in confusion. It wasn't that Rieker suspected that this was Wuming's conspiracy or anything else, but he was suspicious of the Kikai species that had appeared at the moment. After all, the Kikai species all acted in groups, and their neural networks were all connected to each other. It felt awkward as if everyone shared the same brain. However, it was precisely because of this that making an enemy of a Kikai species was making an enemy of an entire race of Kikai species because their neural networks were all connected. This was also why other races ordered not to provoke the Kikai species. In addition to the other party's replication power, this was also the reason why other races ordered not to provoke the Kikai species. If you accidentally provoked a Mekai seed, countless Mekai seeds would immediately come looking for you. They didn't care about anything else. If you provoked them, they would retaliate. They would attack you without a second thought. Although a single Kikai species was not considered strong, this kind of species that was particularly united and acted in groups were the most difficult to deal with. Rick's mind began to wander after seeing the Mekai seed. Don't worry. It's not what you think, Wuming said. Naturally, he could tell what Rick was thinking. Fear was written all over his face. Hubletus is a Kikai species that I captured. After I captured it, the mainframe that it was connected to cut off its connection with Hubletus and issued a self-destruct mission, but I stopped it. So, there are no other species around this abandoned city except for the three of us. It had to be said that the Kikai race was a very rational race. They would not hesitate to give up when it was time to give up. When the captured party received the order to self-destruct, they would self-destruct. They were so rational that it was scary. However, I really can't compliment a Kikai species that was captured by you and can still listen to you. Did you use some kind of magic or something? No one would believe that a highly rational and team-oriented Kikai species would be captured by someone else. However, this was the truth. Kikai species are also creatures. As long as they can communicate and have self-awareness, it's not difficult to get along with them, Wuming said to Rick as he looked at Hubletus, who was floating in the air. Actually, Wuming had other reasons for being able to get Hubletus to use his words so smoothly. Wuming felt that Hubletus might have started thinking long ago and had a hazy feeling about the heart in his heart. After that, Wuming added fuel to the fire, and Hubletus and Wuming acted together. Wuming believed that even without his arrival and without Wuming's guidance to Hubletus could still obtain the heart through his own release. Wuming had such a premonition. After that, Wuming and Rick did not disturb Hubletus's analysis of the data. They just waited quietly and chatted with each other. Wuming told Rick the story of how he waited for him when he was a Hyunryong in the Uruk. The fact that humans were the first species and could use magic, especially peace, deeply attracted Rick. Your world is really interesting. If it's possible, I really want to go to the Uruk you mentioned to have a look. I still don't know what to hand over. Rick smiled awkwardly. Only now did Rick realize that he did not know Wuming's name. In their previous communication, Rick had directly called Wuming Lord God. My name? Lord God passing by, you can just call me Nameless. As a god who doesn't belong to this world, there's no need to remember it. Wuming gave a discount and laughed it off. Well, forget it. I'll continue to call you Lord God, Rick said embarrassedly. Rick also saw that Wuming did not want to say his name. Since the other party did not want to tell him, then he would not ask. At this moment, Hubletus's state changed. Hubletus, who was floating in the air, opened his yellow eyes that were like warning lines. At the same time, Hubletus put away all the cables connected to the laboratory's mainframe. Reporting, Nameless, I have analyzed the information of the Zeroth protection of the void. Hubletus landed in front of Wuming and said lightly, Zeroth protection of the void? This made Rick puzzled. He did not understand the meaning of this term at all. This is what I want to tell you, Rick. Wuming looked deeply at Rick. A moment later, Hubletus projected the information of the Zeroth protection of the void on the wall. This information, which was extremely precious to other foot therapists, was all exposed to Wuming and Rick. The Zeroth protection of the void was a new weapon tactic completed by other forest elves with the tactic power provided by the creator of the forest elves, forest god Canas. It was a weapon specifically targeted at Arthu and his kin, the Skywing species. However, although it was a weapon targeted at the Skywing species and Arthu, it was not that it could not be used against other races. The principle was simply to let the elves in the fantasy breed's body, which was a high-level life form, self-destruct, allowing them to erupt with tremendous power to deal great damage to the enemy. The various races were not equal. In terms of the elves' adaptability, they were divided into life form and living form. Powerful races such as god breeds, fantasy breeds, dragon elves, giant breeds, and skywing species were called life form, while the other races were called living form. In fact, to put it simply, the life form race was a powerful race with different natures from the living form race, while the living form race was a race weaker than the life form race. This is actually a weapon targeted at Arthu? Rick said in slight shock. Chapter 426. Through the self-destruction of a fantasy breed sprite, it can be used to attack Arthu and his skywing breeds. Its power is enough to destroy the divine marrow of a god. It's practically a weapon of the same nature as the gnome breed's marrow explosion. Rick said seriously. It was worth mentioning that the marrow explosion was information that Rick had found from the gnome's crashed magic airship. The abandoned city of the forest elves was also found from the same magic airship. The Zeroth ward of the void that Zyuberuk had analyzed clearly showed that the power of this tactic could destroy the divine marrow of a god. However, he scoffed at this. If only it were that easy. At the very least, it would have to catch a god off guard and hit it. To explain, the divine marrow was actually the spirit core of a servant. The forest elves actually managed to research such a tactic without anyone noticing. As expected of the race that is best at using magic tactics, Rick said indifferently. It was unknown whether he was mocking or praising. Hint: the forest elves and fairy breeds once formed an alliance and researched a tactic to control the superior life forms. In the end, the skywing breeds were extremely dissatisfied, and the fairy breed city was directly destroyed. In the end, the research on the tactic to control the superior life forms failed. After all, it made sense to be able to control those superior races who thought highly of themselves. Once the forest elves and fairy elves successfully researched them, whether it was the superior races or other biological races, none of them would agree. One was that they were unwilling to be controlled. How dare mere forest elves control them? The skywing breeds with the most explosive and belligerent tempers would be the first to disagree. The other was fear. If the research was really successful, the forest elves and the superior life forms who were already watching and controlling them would be the end of the world for the other races. After all, the superior life forms were really strong. If they formed an alliance, the other life forms would definitely not be able to survive. Therefore, the matter of the forest elves and fairy breeds' research on controlling the superior life forms was discovered by the spies of the other races and spread among the other races. The fairy breeds had withdrawn from the war because their vitality had been greatly damaged by the skywing breeds. Their capital was gone, and the skywing breeds were still attacking. If they did not run, they would be waiting for death. Therefore, the fairies withdrew from the war and went into hiding. Wuming, on the other hand, felt that it should be the races that withdrew from the war and went into hiding because their gods were gone. In order to create their own Lord God, they had to fight. If they found out that their Lord God had been killed by the enemy Lord God, then what was the point of fighting? In short, according to Wuming's research and analysis, the forest elves did not seem to have used this weapon on the battlefield because there were no records. It was the same for the goblins' marrow explosion. The forest goblins and goblins were most likely using these newly researched weapons as their secret trump cards, preparing to use them when they least expected it. Then, this Void Ward Zeroth might very well be a modified version of the forest elves' failed research on controlling superior life forms, Wuming said. Then, Zyubelas nodded and shook his head. Answer. The possibility of this conjecture is very high, but we don't have any specific information, so we can't come to a conclusion. No matter what, this is an extremely dangerous tactic, right? Rick asked. Zyubelas nodded faintly. This is an important piece of information, Rick. Wuming smiled. Rick fell into deep thought. Since he could remember, humans had been hiding from place to place until his hometown was affected by the war. He was lucky not to die, and he searched for more humans. Everyone worked hard to survive. However, Rick slowly grew up and continued to work hard. However, Rick did not know what was going on. He worked hard and became the leader of humans. Since he became the leader, he had the obligation to protect humans. He would let them live. Rick, who thought so, gradually became numb after seeing the cruelty of reality. Again and again, he ordered those who looked at him with a smile to die. However, Rick kept comforting himself that this was to let more people live. This was for the greater good. However, in order to allow more of the 1001 people to live, sacrificing fewer 999 people, was that really for the greater good? Rick knew that this was another level of hypocrisy. Rick was numb. He was irritated, cried, gave up on himself, and even wanted to commit suicide. In this world, death was an escape, but he thought of the other people who were alive. They needed him as a leader, and it had been like this until today. In the past, people were constantly migrating. When they were affected, they quickly moved to a safe place and set up camp. However, in the face of the powerful tactics and weapons developed by the forest elves and gnomes, if the battlefield was near human life, then could humans still survive? They might not even have time to escape. However, there was no safe place in this world. The only safe place was the underworld. However, even if the soul came to the underworld, the dead body would still not be at peace in the human world. It would still be destroyed by the war that was comparable to a natural disaster. If this continued, next time, not only himself, but also his sister, Ivan, Ole, and everyone who was saved by Lord God, would die. Rick stopped thinking. Hey, Lord God, can you end this war? Rick lowered his head slightly. His bangs covered his eyes, making it difficult for others to see clearly. Rick had already given up. Even if Wuming really wanted something, as long as Wuming could end the war, he would do anything. I can. Wuming responded to Rick's expectations and said casually. The condition for ending the war is to decide the strongest person. Then I just need to kill all the other gods, and the war will naturally end. Wuming said coldly. With my current state, in a few days, I will be able to kill all the other gods. Wuming raised his fist and showed a tyrannical smile. But, is this really okay, Rick? Wuming said calmly. I have always thought that the war in this world can only be ended by the most insignificant power in this world. This is what I believe in. Although Wuming's purpose in coming to this world was to save humans, if he could see humans save themselves, then the humans in this world would not be destroyed. They would definitely be able to survive until the end. Rick was silent. He also wanted to end the war with his own hands, but he did not have the power to do so. Not to mention the gods, even the weaker demons and sea dwellers among the other races could not be defeated by humans. As if he had seen through Rick's thoughts, Wuming smiled and then said, Then Rick, let me tell you something. Defeating the other gods is not the only way to make the Star Cup appear. Rick raised his head when he heard that. Chapter 427. Rieker raised his head and looked at Wuming. After a few seconds, Rieker understood. Wuming had said before that the Star Cup was formed when the strongest person appeared. The elf corridor bred various gods, so it was inferred that the elf corridor was the strongest person. In that case, the representative would explode and the elf corridor would appear. With the appearance of the strongest person, the Star Cup would definitely appear. When the time comes, I will go and meet the god of war Artesius. As for you, you will be responsible for piercing the core of this planet and revealing the elf corridor. When the Star Cup appears, you will obtain the Star Cup. This way, the battle for the sole god on this planet will end. Wuming spoke Rieker's mind and pointed out that Rieker should obtain the Star Cup. Hey! Wait a minute, why me? As a god, isn't it better for you to obtain the Star Cup? Rieker said with some surprise. In fact, until now, Rieker had not completely believed in Wuming. He really wanted to end this war, so even if the god in front of him wanted to become the sole god, Rieker had no objections. Then I'm sorry, I have no intention of becoming the sole god of this planet. Wuming shrugged his shoulders with a half-smile and half-helplessly. This world was not one he was familiar with. It could be said that except for Rieker and Xiaofan, Wuming did not know anyone else. To become the sole god of this planet, there was no doubt that he would have to live and die with the planet. Wuming did not have the time for that. Although Wuming was benevolent, he was not a saint. It was impossible for him to spend too much effort on this world. There were other worlds that needed Wuming's help more. Perhaps Wuming would come back to visit in the future, but he would definitely not become the sole god and ruler of this planet. In addition, I still have to fight 2 rounds with Artesius. Otherwise, if the strongest god of war snatches the Star Cup, it will be troublesome, Wu Ming said seriously. And the main reason why I'm not going to get the Star Cup is that I'm not a native of this world, so it's very likely that I won't be able to hold the Star Cup. It's better to leave it to you. Wu Ming patted Rick's shoulder. Rick was silent for a moment before he nodded. Yes, leave it to me. Wu Ming and Rick smiled at each other, their eyes filled with hope. This made Hubert Lutz tilt his head and look at the two strangely. Yes, but the power of humans alone is unable to penetrate the core and reveal the elven corridor, Zyuberek said expressionlessly. In truth, it was not just humans. Even other races, such as the dragon spirits and the skywings, would barely be able to pierce through the Earth's core with their own strength. No, it would be impossible for them to do so. Meanwhile, the forest goblin's Zeroth protection of the void and the goblin's marrow explosion relied on magic spells and magical technological products. They didn't need to pierce through the Earth's core. Unless there was the help of a god. However, if the dragon spirit race's collapsing whistle, the skywing race's sky strike, the forest spirit race's Zeroth void barrier, the goblin race's marrow explosion, and other sure kill abilities of the various races were combined, and with the help of the gods, the Earth's core could be easily opened. But at that time, the planet would be almost finished. However, as long as one became the only god, they would immediately activate their authority to restore the planet. Then there would be no problem. Wu Ming thought so from the beginning, and Rick also thought of this after knowing about the marrow explosion and the Zeroth protection of the void. At that time, I'll help you with the matter of correcting the attacks. I'll definitely make those combined attacks hit the target. Wu Ming showed an expression of victory. I'll leave the rest to you, Rick. I'll obediently wait for your victory on the corpse of a god. Wu Ming squatted down and patted Huberic's head. Then he turned to Rick and said, "Don't worry. If it's you, it should be possible," Wu Ming teased. Facing Wu Ming's distrustful question, Rick smiled. "Leave it to me. I'll end this game." Now, Rick showed an unprecedented smile. This was a smile from the bottom of his heart. By the way, Rick, I have something to ask of you," Wu Ming suddenly said. "What's the matter?" Rick looked at Wu Ming in confusion. "This child and I want to enter the life of you humans and experience life. Allow me to refuse." Before we finished, Rick interrupted Wu Ming's words. How can you do it so neatly?" Wu Ming smiled. Rick looked at Wu Ming with melancholy, then looked at Hubert, who was a Kikai race. "If it's you, Lord God, there's no problem." After all, Wu Ming's appearance looked like a human, and his speech and behavior were consistent with a human's. But Hubela's was. Rick looked at Hubert helplessly. Hubert tilted his head and looked at Rick in confusion. Hidden under the cloak is a mechanical body, stiff and lifeless, and a mechanical tone. Without a doubt, she is a Kikai race. Even if she disguises herself, once she enters the life of us humans, she will be easily exposed. You know how afraid humans are of other races in this era. If we don't chase her away, we won't be able to live a normal life. I clearly understood what Rick meant. Actually, Hubert had to disguise herself as an ordinary human girl, and no one could find out. After entering the human society, Hubert was destined to have more contact with people. This way, it was only a matter of time before she was exposed. In other words, it's fine as long as no one finds out, right? Wu Ming smiled. Well, that's what you say, but I don't think that a Kikai race can hide her identity. Rick touched his chin and looked at the items on Hubert's body. Data flowed through his eyes, a glowing disc on his right forehead that looked like a magic formation, a pair of wings on his back, and 2 tail-like threads near his tailbone that connected to the sprites. A Kikai race without a sprite was like a car without gasoline. It was useless. Then what about now? Wu Ming smiled. Then through the hand on Hubert's head, Wu Ming transferred his magic power to Hubert's body, or rather, the art on Hubert's body. In an instant, Hubert's body lit up. It was so bright that Rick couldn't open his eyes. When the light gradually dissipated, Rick opened his eyes. Rick looked at the little girl standing beside Wu Ming in shock. Rose-colored hair, tattered clothes, no wings, no tail, no disc on her forehead, and with those big watery amber eyes, she was simply adorable. This should be fine, right? Wu-Ming looked at Rick with a smile. If that's the case. Yes. I guess. Rick smiled awkwardly. Then, let's play a game. Wu-Ming smiled. Chapter 428. Checkmate. Xiaofan said calmly. She picked up the chess piece created by Wu-Ming's magic and killed Rick directly. It's cheating to let Jikai Seed play chess. Rick sighed helplessly as he looked at his chess piece that couldn't be more dead. This is a fair game. You have to abide by the rules, Rick, Wu-Ming, who was sitting on the side and watching the game in boredom, said with a gloating smile. Damn it. You actually let Jikai Seed play chess with me. There should be a limit to cheating. Rick muttered helplessly. Okay, didn't you agree to it before? If Xiaofan wins, let her join the lives of humans. You have to accept your loss, Rick. You have to accept your loss, Xiaofan also said expressionlessly. That's right. Rick was excited because he saw chess that he hadn't seen for a long time. Then, he agreed to the game and lost completely. After all, how could a human brain compare to a machine? Of course, there were exceptions, but this exception wasn't Rick. Yes. I know. I'll let Xiaofan join our lives. You said before that you wanted to join us. Then, I'll have to trouble you to look after her. Don't let her cause any trouble, Rick said helplessly. Through the exchange just now, Rick also knew the name of this Jikai Seed. I'll try my best. Wu-Ming looked at Rick with a smile and said irresponsible words. Sigh. Rick sighed helplessly. These two guys were indeed non-humans. If they turned into humans, they would definitely be problem children. That's right, Rick suddenly said. The name Xiaofan doesn't sound like a human's. And this tone. If you don't change it, it might leave suspicion in the crowd, Rick said earnestly. In this kind of era, not only was Rick suspicious, but the other ordinary people were also suspicious. If they saw something, the refugees would be in a panic. Rick believed in Wu-Ming and also believed in Xiaofan, who was captured by Wu-Ming, but this didn't mean that others could believe them. So, if it was possible, can you get Hublets to change it? Asked Leave. Are you all right, Huberek? Wu-Ming patted Huberek's little head, looking at him. Answer, there's no problem. Xiaofan felt Wu-Ming's head patting and was stunned for a moment before he nodded. Then, first, remove the mechanical word at the beginning of the sentence, and then change the character to be timid and quiet. Is that okay? Wu-Ming asked softly. Hubert nodded and closed his eyes. After a few seconds, Hubert opened his eyes again. Is this okay? When Xiaofan spoke again, it wasn't the same emotionless voice as before. Instead, it was the timid voice of a human girl that was mixed with cuteness. With Wu-Ming's magic, Xiaofan was no different from an ordinary, timid human girl. Well done, Xiaofan. Wu-Ming gently patted Xiaofan's head as if he was facing his own sister. As for the name, you'll be called Xiaobi from now on, and I'll be your brother, Villo. Remember that. Wu-Ming treated Xiaobi gently as if he had really become a brother. Xiaobi. Remember? Rick raised his eyebrows as he looked at the two people who were acting like crazy. Until now, I still feel that you superior races really have too much of an advantage, Rick said in confusion. However, Wu-Ming understood. Wasn't Rick referring to the series of tricks that Wu-Ming and Xiaofan had used? Although humans are weak, the spirit that they possess is something that non-human races like us can't compare to. I think that as the leader of the humans, you must also understand this principle. Wu-Ming's words made Rick laugh. Well, that's true. Then, it's almost time for us to go back. With that, Rick began to walk towards the stairs. Rick, I have some unfortunate news for you. Wu-Ming suddenly called out to Rick. Huh? Rick stopped and turned around to look at Wu-Ming in confusion. What is it? The weather outside is a little bad. Wu-Ming revealed a mischievous smile. In the outside world, countless elven skeletons were like a snowstorm, wreaking havoc on the earth. Suddenly, a shadow flew out from the snowstorm. They were Rick, who was fully armed and riding the creature, and Xiaobi, who was flying at full speed with Rick and the creature in his hands. Wah! Rick's scream was heard. About a few minutes later, Xiaobi stopped and put the half-dead Rick and the equally half-dead creature on the ground. We're here. Xiaobi said softly. I can't take it anymore. Rick weakly lay on the ground and said faintly. The creature had already fainted. Suddenly, a black door like a black hole appeared, and Wuming's figure appeared from inside. Yo, Rick, are you okay? Wuming looked at Rick lying on the ground with a mischievous smile and greeted him. Damn it. With such a convenient method, why did you let me fly back while being carried by Xiaobi? Rick raised his hand and asked. Teleportation door, because this door only allows me to pass through, so there's no other way. Wuming said with a smile. Of course, this statement was wrong. He simply wanted to see Rick suffer to satisfy his own mischievous interest. When Wuming, Xiaobi, and Rick were preparing to leave the underground laboratory of the forest elves, Wuming discovered the situation outside in advance. According to Rick, it was a death ash storm. As mentioned before, the elven skeletons were like rain and snow when the weather changed, so it wasn't impossible for a situation similar to a blizzard to occur. Although Wuming used the excuse of, with my defensive tactic, there's no need to worry at all, to let Xiaobi directly carry Rick and his horse back here. It had to be said that the horse was coincidentally hidden by Rick and was able to avoid the death ash storm. It should be known that ordinary humans would be completely corroded in a few seconds under such a death ash storm. The elven skeletons were just that terrifying. Speaking of which, your tactic is quite useful. Rick checked his divine body and was really fine. Not only that, but his horse was also fine. Xiaobi too. Xiaobi also looked at her own body and was completely unharmed. By the way, although Xiaobi was not afraid of the death ash storm, the elven skeletons could still cause surface abrasion to Xiaobi. Hence, Wuming had also set up a tactic for her. Let's go back to the village first. Rick needs to rest well. Wuming looked again at Rick, who was dizzy from the high-speed movement. You bastard. You think it's caused by me? Rick roared angrily. It's Xiaobi. Wuming pointed at Xiaobi shamelessly. It's Xiaobi. Xiaobi nodded. In principle, Xiaobi did indeed cause Rick to feel dizzy. I really lose to you guys. Chapter 429. Because Xiaobi knew that they had to come directly to the cave that led to the village, Rick led the half-dead horse, and led Wuming and Xiaobi into the cave. Along the way, Rick kept reminding Wuming and Xiaobi. Remember, don't say anything unnecessary and make everyone suspicious. Also, Vero, you have to keep an eye on Xiaobi and don't let her go berserk. Also, if people greet you, you have to answer them politely. Rick, I seriously suspect that you think I'm an ignorant god. Wuming complained helplessly. Cough cough. I'm just worried. Ahaha. Rick laughed awkwardly. You're indeed not an ignorant god. You're a problematic god. Immediately after, Rick stopped. Wuming and Xiaobi, who were following behind Rick, also stopped. There was an old door in front of them. The large underground cave behind the door was Rick's village. Wuming had already noticed that when he was observing. Then let's go, Villo Xiaobi. With that said, Rick pushed open the old wooden door. Creak. Following the sound of the old wooden door, the cave appeared in front of Wuming and Xiaobi. Rick! It was still the voice that Wuming heard before. The woman named Crone, Rick's sister, threw herself into Rick's arms. She hugged Rick tightly and called out Rick's name worriedly. Okay, Crone. I'm fine. Rick comforted his sister in a fluster. Because he went out alone and there was no one else to look after him, she was even more worried. Wuming saw that Crone was unusually worried this time. She was even more worried than last time. The others only looked at Rick and Xiaobi from their posts. However, they were more curious about Wuming and Xiaobi. I told you to call me sister. Who are the two behind you? At this time, Crone noticed the two people behind Rick. Them. I met the wanderers on my way back. Their village was destroyed, so I brought them back. Following Rick's words, Wuming took off his brown hood and smiled at Crone. Hello, my name is Villo Salansword. This is my sister, Xiaobi Salansword. Nice to meet you. By the way, because the neat black cloak looked too flashy, Wuming purposely changed his and Xiaobi's cloaks to a refugee cloak. Brother and sister? That's great. Crone said enviously when she saw how dependent Xiaobi was on her brother. Then Xiaobi opened her mouth. Please advise me. While she was at it, Xiaobi pulled down her hood that appeared extremely large due to her figure and hid behind Wuming. Then, she was adorable to Crone. Wah! What's wrong with this child? She's too cute. Crone hugged Xiaobi and rubbed against her. This caused Rick to be shocked. Wuming cast a camouflage spell that could only change Xiaobi's appearance in human eyes. In other words, her body did not change. But fortunately, Xiaobi's body was based on human standards. In addition, Xiaobi was instructed by Wuming to put away the mechanical objects, such as wings and the rings on her head. Therefore, there was no need to worry about being discovered. Xiaobi could not understand Crone's actions. Seeing that Wuming did not give any instructions, she just let Crone hug her. As for Crone, she treated Xiaobi as a shy child and didn't pay much attention to him. Then, that Crone, it's about time to prepare a room for Villo and the others, Rick said nervously. He was afraid that the Kikai seed would treat Crone's actions as an enemy's attack and counterattack. To put it bluntly, Rick was still worried about Xiaobi's Kikai seed. He allowed Xiaobi to join because of Wuming. Otherwise, why would Rick allow a Kikai seed to join his village for a mere game? However, Rick had forgotten one thing. If it wasn't for Silent Sound, Xiaobi might have threatened Rick. Then, if Rick didn't agree, she would have played a game with him to determine the winner. The outcome wouldn't have changed. Ah, you're right. It's almost night. If we don't hurry, Villo and Xiaobi won't have a place to sleep. Then, Crone quickly let go of Xiaobi and prepared to help Wuming and Xiaobi tidy up the room. Crone, I have a storage room next door. There's a bed too. Tidy it up a little and you can let them use it, Rick suddenly said. Can we? If that's the case, where do we put the collected information? Crone asked. It seems that storage room isn't an ordinary storage room. It should store the information that Rick has been collecting. Wuming thought. Put the information in my room. I need to study it today. As if he thought of something, Rick revealed a smile full of fighting spirit. Rick. Crone was stunned when she saw Rick smile. She hadn't seen Rick smile in a long time. What's wrong? Seeing Crone stunned, Rick stopped smiling and looked at Crone in confusion. Then, Crone walked up to Rick step by step. She reached out her hands and touched Rick's face. Then, she squeezed hard. Ouch, ouch, ouch. Rick was shocked by Crone's sudden attack. His own sister's attack on his face was not a normal kind of pain. Speak. Are you someone pretending to be Rick? Give me back my brother. Crone stared at Rick mockingly. How could Rick not know that this was his sister's sudden prank? I admit defeat, sister. Rick put his hands together and begged for mercy. Humph. 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 Not enough. As she spoke, Crone increased her strength. Ouch, ouch, ouch. Villo, help. Wuming, on the other hand, had his arms crossed in front of his chest as he watched the farce between the siblings with great interest. A few minutes later, in Rick's room. The originally tidy room was now filled with all kinds of scrolls of information, filling the room to the brim. This was the stuff that Crone moved from next door. She was still cleaning the room next door. Rick rubbed his cheeks as he studied the map in front of him in annoyance. Your sister is quite interesting. Wuming, who was sitting on the bed, said with a smile. Well, she hasn't been this happy in a long time. This pain is worth it. Rick now understood that Crone had become like that after seeing his smile. Although Crone usually looked cheerful, she was always worried about her family, her brother Rick. The reason why Rick let Crone go was because he blamed himself for showing his bad attitude to his family. If only my sister could always be like this. Rick smiled. That depends on you, Rick. As long as you're happy, your sister will be happy too. Wuming, who was on the bed, said with boredom. Xiaobi, on the other hand, sat beside Wuming obediently and didn't do anything else. Well, that's true. Then, let's talk business, Lord God, Rick said seriously. Chapter 430. The first step in Wuming and Rick's plan was to prevent the humans from becoming the final battlefield. I already know about the secret weapons of the goblins and forest elves. However, that alone isn't enough to gather them together. As he spoke, Rick placed the map on the ground and showed it to Wuming. The Sky Wings are on the continent opposite Lucia, Yar Ayla. If we want them to leave Lucia, we'll need a plan, Rick said. The other races are either retreating from the battle or are too few in number. Furthermore, they're unable to fight against the other powerful races and want to reap the benefits. The only races with power are the Sky Wings, Forest Elves, and Goblins. Wuming marked the territories of the three races on the map. To put it simply, as long as the Forest Elves and Goblins are in conflict, they'll rope in some of the other races and form two camps, Rick said with a smile. This was a long-term understanding of the big picture. It was basically impossible to be wrong. Then what we need to do now is to get the people of the various races on Lucia to leave. That'll require us to gather information. Then Wuming and Rick looked at each other and smiled. Then, regarding the issue of manpower, I'll go select people to form a suicide squad later. After all, those races were scattered all over Lucia. If Rick were to rely on himself, it would take a very long time. Assuming that Rick found out about the Goblin's trump card and revealed the information about the Forest Goblin's Zeroth protection of the Void, then started to walk towards the Forest Goblin's territory. When he arrived at the Forest Goblin's territory, Rick would find that the two sides had already started fighting. The Goblins, who were wary of the Forest Goblins, had won the battle and killed the Forest Goblins without leaving anything behind. That would completely mess up the plan. Hence, they needed manpower and messenger pigeons. Even so, Rick, you haven't forgotten about me, have you? I'm super strong. Wuming looked at Rick. Rick understood what Wuming meant. As long as Wuming displayed his destructive power, it would be easy for the other races to retreat. After all, no one wanted to live in an area with a bomb nearby. But, isn't this the time to prove the possibility of humanity? Just wait and see. When I need you, I won't hold back. Rick smiled wantonly as he looked at Wuming. Then I'll wait and see. Wuming did not insist. He was here to save the humans, but he was not their nanny. It would be best if the humans could save themselves. If not, Wuming would step in. At this moment, someone knocked on the door. Please come in, Rick said. Rick had told him that he had something to discuss with Avillo, so he told him to knock on the door first if he wanted to find him. Creak! The door was pushed open, and Rick's sister Crony walked in. Villo, Xiaofan. The room is ready. You can use it later, Crone said gently. Yes, sorry to trouble you, Miss Crone. Wuming smiled at Crone. Thank you. Xiaofan had been told by Wuming that she had to say thank you in this situation. Wah, I can't, this child is too cute. Crone rushed up and hugged Xiaofan, rubbing against her. Ugh. Xiaofan made a silent protest. Ha ha ha, looks like Miss Crone likes my sister a lot. Then, can I trouble you to take her for a bath? Wuming smiled and suggested. This time, not only Crone, but even Rick was surprised. Can I? I'll take good care of this child. Crone was surprised because she was happy to be able to bathe such a cute child. Then I'll have to trouble you. By the way, this child is very shy. If possible, can you bathe Xiaofan alone? Wuming smiled and nodded. No problem. I'll take good care of Xiaofan. I promise to bathe Xiaofan until she's white and clean. Crone rubbed against Xiaofan again. Be good and listen to your sister, Xiaofan. Wuming stared at Xiaofan and said. Xiaofan. Got it. Then Crone led Xiaofan and left. Wait a minute, Villo. If we let Crone bathe Xiaofan, won't we be exposed? Rick said in a panic. After all, even if he used a camouflage spell to change Xiaofan's image in the eyes of others, once they were honest with each other, Crone who touched Xiaofan would realize that something was wrong. Just like Xiaofan's hair. Although it looked soft, it was actually made of ultra-tough metal wire. When she washed her hair, she would realize that something was wrong. Don't worry, Rick. I've already used suggestion magic on Crone. No matter how much I touch her, Crone will treat Xiaofan as a human, Wuming said as he raised his hand and a ray of light appeared. This way, Xiaofan will be able to better integrate into human life. What was that saying again? Being honest with each other was often a good way to increase trust. Just like the Japanese mixed bath. Cough cough. Back to the topic. Really, magic is so useful. Rick said enviously with his dead fish eyes. Let's continue. Then, Wuming and Rick sat opposite each other and continued their conversation. After a moment of conversation, Wuming understood Rick's meaning. Because we've considered that the other party will directly kill the informant, so we need to prepare more people? Wuming said. This was also why Rick needed a suicide squad. If there were too few people, the plan might fail. Yes, so I will gather some trustworthy people who can be part of the suicide squad and tell them about this, Rick said in a sorrowful tone. Therefore, these people were basically dead once they died. Rick's plan was for these people, including Rick himself, not to return to the village. They would be treated as dead ghosts, who went out to explore. In addition, because the skeleton of the elves had the effect of shielding their aura, they needed to cover their bodies with some skeleton of the elves when they faced people of different races during missions. This was what humans called black ash. However, the skeleton of the elves had strong corrosive properties. Covering it with acid was equivalent to covering one's body with it. After a long time, one would directly die. This was the true meaning of suicide squad and ghosts. They were not afraid of death and dared to act as ghosts and become real ghosts. Clank. A bottle of potion was placed on the table by Wuming and made a sound. This is... Rick looked at the blue bottle of potion in confusion. This is a potion that can be used to contact abnormal states. If it's the corrosion of the skeleton of the elves, it might be effective. Try it later, Wuming said. This bottle of potion was an item in the Yggdrasil game, specifically used to deal with abnormal conditions. Wuming thought that corrosion was also an abnormal state, so he took it out and asked Rick to try it. You've been a great help, Villo. Rick looked at Wuming excitedly, and then carefully picked up the bottle of blue potion. Wuming smiled when he saw how careful Rick was. Clank! Clank! The table was full of these potions. Clank! Clank! Rick was dumbfounded. You can have as many as you want. Don't be shy. Wuming smiled and pointed at the table. Wuming took all of the potions that Nazalik had. Since Nazalik could make more, Wuming took all of them. Damn it! You bastards! Then, Rick's miserable cries could be heard. Chapter 431. Riker and Wuming went out to experiment. Riker smeared the black ash that could be seen everywhere on his hand, and then dripped a few drops of blue potion on the back of his hand. Instantly, the black ash disappeared, and the corrosive effect also disappeared. In the room, Wuming and Riker sat opposite each other. Xiaofan sat beside Wuming in boredom. She had already been cleaned up by Crone and changed into her pajamas. Damn it, evil gods, go to hell! Riker muttered. Hey, that's about enough. You can't even handle such a small blow? Wuming smiled helplessly. The reason why Riker was like this was simply because Wuming's nouveau riche way of doing things provoked Riker. After all, in this war-torn era, everything was precious, and people cherished it very much. Based on the effect just now, if everyone covered their whole body with black ash and drank a bottle of blue potion, the black ash would last for 3 hours. After that, the black ash would be eliminated by the power of the potion. After all, the effects of taking it inside the body and taking it outside the body were completely different. Riker was also thinking of the worst-case scenario. Therefore, if a person covered their whole body with black ash and drank a bottle of potion, the black ash would last for 3 hours before disappearing. Then use this amount as the standard and see the situation, Wuming said. After all, there was no need to cover the whole body with black ash. Not to mention the corrosive effect of the black ash. Even if the potion was effective, pain and scars would still be left. Moreover, for humans, the black ash only needed to cover a quarter of the body to completely conceal the aura, so that other races wouldn't be able to determine who the intruder was. For example, covering an arm to the chest, abdomen, and neck with black ash could almost completely conceal the aura of a human. Well, I will choose the members of the ghost tonight. Riker didn't dwell on the issue of Wuming's nouveau riche and became serious. Speaking of which, Riker, leave the forest essence to me. Wuming looked at Riker seriously. You don't believe me? Although he said so, Rick still understood Wuming's intention. The forest elves were actually an exceptionally cunning, or rather, suspicious and vengeful race. Even though the goblins had developed magic airships and the orcs had mastered advanced navigation technology, the forest goblins had also developed magic airships that could cover an entire forest. Although its performance was not as good as the goblins. But in reality, these races were not as easy to deal with as the forest fairies. To put it simply, the forest elves were not as easy to fool as the other races. Compared to Rick and the others, Wuming could at least escape unscathed. At least it's safer this way. I don't want you to come back half dead or unable to come back. Wuming jokingly teased Rick. Then are you confident? Rick first smiled, then looked at Wuming seriously. Of course, Wuming said without hesitation, with a confident expression on his face. But I'll have to ask your ghost unit to cooperate with me a little. No problem. Xiaofan didn't speak at the side. She just looked at the conversation between the two as if they were old friends who had been together for many years. Data flowed in her orange-yellow eyes. This is also a heart. Just like that, a great plan that could subvert all races was unveiled once again. The next morning, Wuming came out of his room early. Wuming didn't go to see the recruitment of the ghost last night. He just took a quick look and left with Xiaofan. Coincidentally, because Wuming and Rick's rooms were next to each other, Wuming met Rick, who was about to leave his room as soon as he went out. Yo Rick, you're up early. Wuming greeted. You actually have the nerve to greet me. I originally wanted you and Zio to support me, but you actually sneaked away. Rick had a tragic expression. You don't know how nervous I was at that time. Everyone was looking at me. So many people only looked at me when I became the village chief. You don't know. Wuming didn't listen to Rick's complaints. Instead, he looked at Xiaofan, who was holding his hand. By the way, this was suggested by Xiaofan. Xiaofan used the reason of shouldn't siblings hold hands? To let Wuming hold her hand. Is she afraid of crowds? Wuming said with interest. Xiaofan doesn't know. Xiaofan calmly shook her head. Right, Xiaofan. How was your interaction with Crone yesterday? After all, Xiaofan and Crone were honest with each other. They must have gotten along well. On the other hand, Xiaofan seemed to have recalled something terrible. Wuming could clearly sense that Xiaobi's body trembled slightly. Crone is so scary. Xiaofan recalled how Crone hugged and played with Xiaofan in the shower yesterday. She felt a lingering fear. Seeing Xiaofan like this, Wuming could only smile awkwardly and didn't say anything else. Hey, don't ignore me. Suddenly, Rick raised his voice. Oh, are you done, Rick? Wuming responded with a smile. Forget it. Let's not talk about this. Rick shook his head. The ghost is ready. We only need an opportunity to act. After all, many people leaving the village was a matter of concern. Hence, they couldn't just let those who were willing to become ghosts leave the village. Wuming brought two pieces of news to Rick. Good news and bad news. Which one do you want to hear first? Bad news, Rick answered without hesitation. I noticed a gnome warship nearby, as well as a few dragon gnomes. Perhaps because the two races had a conflict before, the gnomes and dragon gnomes didn't like each other. What Wuming meant was that this time, the two would most likely affect the surrounding human villages, which were Rick's small villages. Hearing this, Rick frowned at first. Then his brows relaxed. Through this bad news, Rick also guessed the good news. That's right. It's just as you thought. After this attack, the ghosts can act. Wuming smiled. Wuming woke up early in the morning to tell Rick these two pieces of news. At this moment, the mountain where the village was located shook violently. Without a doubt, the gnomes and dragon gnomes nearby were fighting. You really have a crow's mouth. Rick didn't know whether to laugh or cry at Wuming. He didn't know whether to praise or scold him. Chapter 432. Everyone, leave from the west exit. Crone shouted, directing the panicking crowd to leave. Although Wuming and Rick didn't wake up late, Crony and a portion of the villagers woke up even earlier than them. These villagers were mostly young men and women. The rest of the villagers were old, weak, sick, disabled, and children. The rest of the villagers were woken up by the tremors outside. Following the shouts of their loved ones, They hurriedly packed their luggage and left in the designated direction. This was because the humans in this world would be affected by the battles of other races after a period of time. Therefore, the humans had to prepare their luggage early in order to prepare for any unexpected situations. In this era, death was a common occurrence. It was even possible to lose one's life while sleeping. Therefore, the people were used to preparing their luggage early. Like people who were used to earthquakes, they didn't panic and left in an orderly manner. However, it could be seen that the humans in this world lived in a cruel world. Seeing that almost everyone was leaving, Crone noticed that Rick and the Villo siblings didn't leave. Did something happen? Crone said worriedly. According to Rick, the Villo and Xiaofan were clear-headed, so he wanted to discuss some issues with them. Crone believed Rick's words. After all, if the Villo siblings weren't smart, they wouldn't be able to wander around in this chaotic world. Because idiots had already died in the hands of natural disasters, black and gray, and other races. Even if it was because they had overslept the previous night, it was impossible for Rick, Varen, and the others to not be affected by such a violent tremor. Therefore, the only answer was that something else had happened. Crone ran to Rick's room. Looking at the half-closed door, Crone trembled as she pushed the door open. Rick's body trembled as he knelt on the ground in grief and let out a sorrowful cry. Damn it! How many more times do I have to go through this? Rick! Crone looked at her grief-stricken brother and couldn't bear to see him like this. Crone hugged Rick from behind and comforted him. That's enough, Rick. Leave the rest to me. Then, the corners of Rick's mouth curved into a smile. Have you memorized it, Villo? After Rick finished speaking, Wuming and Xiao appeared at the door. At the same time, Wuming was holding a pen and paper in his hand. Not a single word missing. Wuming raised the paper in his hand at the same time. That's it, Crone. You're the next village chief. This is the map of the next village. The safest path is along the edge. Rick stood up and handed a map to Crone. Ha! Crone didn't even realize what had happened. That's it, Chloe. With that, Rick walked to the door and met up with Wuming. Wait a minute, what the hell is going on? Rick, where are you going? Crone was extremely confused. Even though Crony's talent was enough for her to become the village chief, she still couldn't accept Rick's sudden departure. Just ending this game. Don't worry. Rick turned around and smiled wantonly. Don't worry. I still have a sister to take care of. I won't mess around with Rick. Wuming raised his hand and suggested. This made Crone sigh in relief. She couldn't accept the sudden departure of a new friend. Then I'll leave Xiao to you. Wuming pushed Xiao into Crone's arms. Ha! Although Crone liked this cute child, she couldn't bear to see them messing around like this. And just as Crony was about to say something, Xiaofan spoke. Please, you big sister. Crone. Xiaofan stuttered shyly as she looked at Crone with her big watery eyes. Instantly, the suggestion magic that Wuming cast on Xiao was activated. With Xiao's cute performance, Crone, who was a normal person, seemed to have been charmed. Wah, leave it to me. Instantly, Crone shrieked as she hugged Xiao and rubbed against her. I'm just sending Rick off. I'll be back soon. After Wuming finished speaking, Rick and Wuming left. After Wuming and Rick left, Crone reacted. You must return safely. She prayed to the running man. Outside, on the path of retreat. Due to the fight between the goblins and the dragon goblins, not only did the ordinary people have to return to the village, even Rick and the specters had to return to the specter's nest. Now, Wuming and Rick were walking on the path to the specter's nest. I wanted to ask, are you going back to the village? Rick looked at Wuming suspiciously. Therefore, according to the plan, Wuming had almost no time to leave Rick and the others and return to the village. I have my ability. I can create a clone of the same level as me. Wuming explained. Wuming's dependent avatar had the ability to split his avatar. Wuming was going to use that ability to send his avatar back to the village to take care of Xiaofan. After all, Xiaofan was just living with human beings. Not to mention whether Xiaofan's avatar would be discovered by human beings. Moreover, Xiaofan needed someone to enlighten her. It just so happens that I also have a question. Wuming said. Do you want me to record what you said just now? Isn't that something that can be forged in minutes? Only the heavens knew why there was a need for someone to record the words with a pen and paper as proof. Wu Ming wasn't wrong at all. That thing could be forged directly. It's just a title to replace the village chief. It's not that useful. Rick smiled slightly. You really have a bad taste. Wu Ming joked. Goddess Sama is not qualified to say that. Rick retorted. Ha ha ha, both of them laughed. When they came to the entrance of a cave, both Wu Ming and Rick stopped. Then I'll go first. Wu Ming looked away. Well, we will also launch a strategy against the goblins and the orcs in 5 days. Immediately, without saying much, Rick and Wu Ming walked into the cave with their backs facing each other. Rick walked directly into the cave, and Wu Ming flew directly into the sky and flew away. So, they were really going to leave after sending him off. Chapter 433. After Wu Ming left the human gathering place, he directly returned to his true form and flew into the sky. Then, because of the plan, Wu Ming directly cancelled the various shielding techniques on his body. At the same time, Wu Ming also released his own energy, which was the holy aura. At that moment, Wu Ming was like a flame in the night. No, a fireball, which was extremely eye-catching. Now the goblins' air fleet is on the northern coast of Wuxia. Wu Ming remembered the map that Rick showed him. Wu Ming stayed in the air and looked to the north. Wu Ming's current location was south of Wuxia, which was not far from the northern coast. Let's mess around a little. With that said, Wu Ming spread his wings and quickly flew toward the north. In the south, Wuxia and Yar Ayla intersected. It was an ocean, and the Forest Elves' fleet was sailing from that ocean. As the current chief octopal sorcerer of the Forest Elves and the main researcher of the Zeroth Ward of the Void, Shinki Nirbalian's wisdom was naturally needless to say. She was also quite proud of herself, so she took on the heavy responsibility of the Forest Elves' fleet commander. However, she was rather fearful of the mysterious powerful being that the dragon spirit mentioned. After all, even though it was annoying to think of a musclehead who didn't have any intelligence and relied solely on brute strength, Shik had to admit that his powerful strength was indeed frightening. As a result, it was no longer appropriate for her to act freely in Wuxia. Shinki once suspected the identity of the mysterious powerhouse, but she could not tell which race he was from until the creator of the Sky Forest Elves, Canas, arrived. Her creator, the god Canas, had told her that the mysterious expert was not from another race, but a god from another world. However, the Star Cup of that planet did not work on him, so she did not have to worry about him competing for the Star Cup. Coincidentally, she received news recently that the Forest Elves' old rival, the goblins, was attacked. According to the spy's report, the goblins could not capture the other party's figure, and the fleet's instruments could only detect a large number of powerful energy sources. Those energy sources were not elves, but unknown energy sources. From this, Shinki judged that the dragon who attacked the goblins' fleet was the powerhouse from another world that Canas mentioned. Therefore, Shinki decided to evacuate the Forest Elves from Wuxia. However, it seemed that the goblins' losses were not serious. Because of that, it just proved that the mysterious powerhouse was just passing by, and the reason for the attack was unknown. In any case, the Forest Elves enjoyed watching the Forest Elves. Shinki made such a decision in order not to let her people follow in their footsteps. So, as the Forest Elves fleet, the Elves airship fleet, the Elves airship fleet, and headed to the Yar Ayla continent. Naturally, Shinki had his own plans for heading towards the continent of Yar Ayla. Godzes, the Zeroth Elves, the Zeroth god, was the Elves', was the god. Standing at the front of the fleet, Shinki looked at the Wuxia continent. For the sake of our god, please bless us, Canas. Shinki prayed to his god. And at that moment, not good. Lord Shinki. An ordinary Forest Elves soldier hurriedly ran to the bow of the ship. What's the matter? Don't panic. Shinki looked at the soldier unhappily. Yes. I'm sorry, Lord Shinki. The soldier calmed down and stood up straight. Tell me what happened. Shinki asked casually. It's like this, Lord Shinki. Our magic has detected an unknown energy source, and the amount is huge. The captain asked me to inform you. What did you say? In the captain's room of the Forest Elves' magic airship flagship. Shinki walked in a little panic, and his eyes suddenly rushed to the big screen. "What the hell is going on?" Shinki said with a little anger. At that moment, because of the confidentiality issue, there was only one captain left in the entire captain's room, and that captain didn't know why Shinki was angry, so the captain had to report truthfully. "It's like this, Lord Shinki. We just detected a large non-elven energy source. I'm worried that it's that, so I asked the soldier to inform you," the captain said politely. Even he had to show respect to the Zeroth Shield Chief's 8 stages, and the Zeroth Elves. That was why Shinki roared angrily as soon as he came in. Shinki naturally understood what the other party meant by that. As the captain, Shinki naturally knew that the goblins were attacked, and he also knew that the goblins were also attacked after detecting a large non-elven energy source. The soldier didn't know the situation, so after being persuaded by Shinki, he reported very calmly. And Shinki naturally knew that the situation changed from the goblins' panic to the red-crowned cranes and the red-crowned cranes. That made Shinki feel like she was fooled, and that was why Shinki was so angry as soon as he entered the room. "That didn't attack?" Shinki frowned slightly and asked the captain. Because the goblins were attacked after detecting that energy source, Shinki was shocked that they weren't attacked. "No, but the other party used a shielding spell. We can't use detection magic to see the other party's influence. We can only see with our eyes." The captain shook his head. "The other party's identity is a mystery. Not only did it interfere with the battle between the Dragon Elves and Kikai Elves, but it also attacked the goblins, and it's not one of us," the captain said in distress. Of course, the arrival of the god Canas would not let the captain know. Although his status was slightly higher, it was not that high. In order to maintain a sense of mystery, only 10 people knew about the arrival of Canas. Those 10 people were either powerful or strong, and Shinki, as the main developer of the Zeroth Shield, naturally knew about it. You don't have to worry about the other party's identity. The higher-ups have their own arrangements. Where is the other party now? Shinki changed the topic. The captain quickly checked the energy source, and as a result, the captain was shocked, and his face changed. It's right here." "What?" Shinki was also surprised. The captain brought up the image, and the energy source just happened to coincide with the flagship. "Yo, 2 forest elves." Chapter 434. Wuming's voice came from the captain's room. "Who is it?" The captain roared and looked towards the source of the voice. A young man with black hair and red pupils wearing a loose white shirt appeared out of thin air at the door of the captain's room and leaned against the wall of the captain's room. "Oh, aren't you looking for me?" Wuming smiled. Exine-ku frowned slightly and said to the captain without turning her head, "You can leave first." But, Lord Exine-ku. "Okay, I understand." The captain wasn't stupid and walked towards Wuming's position. That was the door. Wuming wasn't afraid that the captain would go home and call for reinforcements, because both sides knew that violence wouldn't solve the problem. The captain's room door opened, and the captain took a deep look at Wuming before leaving. Bam, tisage. The captain's room door closed again. Now the only ones left in the captain's room were the Forest Elite's chief level 8 sorcerer Exine-ku Nirba and Wuming. "Then, Lord God, what can I do for you?" Exine-ku politely bowed slightly and greeted Wuming. "Don't be nervous," Wuming said calmly, then walked to the captain's room and sat down. "I don't mean any harm." Wuming maintained a smile as if everything was within his control, and looked at Exine-ku with incomparable arrogance. "You must be joking. Lord Canas has already told us about you. As a god from another world, you don't need to compete for the Star Cup, so please tell us your intentions." Exine-ku's words were still polite, but Wuming could hear the mockery in her words. "You really dare to say that, Canas' creation?" Wuming was instantly angered. Although he still had a smile, the anger in his eyes and the aura he emitted made Exine-ku feel terrified. "After all, Lord Canas is a supreme existence. We can't compare to you in terms of power or wisdom, so please forgive Exine-ku's offense." Exine-ku Nirba's meaning was clear. They were weak, so it was better to be straightforward with a powerful being like Canas, because they had to agree no matter what. Wuming naturally understood this, so he only got a little angry and calmed down. "Then, I'll be straightforward. Then I'll get straight to the point. I found something interesting in the air fleet of the goblins. It's an existence comparable to the Zeroth protection of the void." "What?" Xianke heard Wuming's words and couldn't stay calm. Not only was she surprised that Wuming knew about the Zeroth protection of the void, but she was also surprised that the goblins had an existence comparable to the Zeroth protection of the void. Don't worry, even if I know about the Zeroth protection of the void, I won't do anything to you. Besides, I'm here for your own good this time. Wuming smiled and calmed Xianke down. Her beautiful face was solemn. Then, Lord Canas, are you going to tell us about the gophers? Xianke asked. There was another layer of meaning in this sentence. Even if you are helping us forest elves, do you have a purpose or something else? After all, it was impossible to give without expecting anything in return. There was no such thing as a free lunch. As a wise person, Xianke naturally understood this principle. Don't be nervous. You also know that I can't use this planet's star cup even if I obtain it. I don't have any other purpose, I'm just doing this for my own pleasure. Wuming shrugged and waved his hand. Pleasure. Xianke furrowed her brows in confusion. After all, I can't obtain any benefits from this world. I can only enjoy the pleasure this world brings me, Wuming explained. The goblins have developed a weapon that can explode divine marrow. It's called Marrow Explosion. The Marrow Explosion is all loaded in their aerial fleet and can be launched at any time. Wuming's words made Xianke slightly excited. Explode divine marrow? Xianke fell into deep thought. If that was the case, it would indeed have the same deterrence as the Zeroth protection of the void. It was better to believe it than not. They had to be cautious. Let me give you another reminder. The goblins already know that you have the Zeroth protection of the void. Wuming's words gave Xianke another heavy blow. How is that possible? Xianke thought that her forest goblin's defense system and anti-spy system were perfect. Therefore, Xianke didn't think that anyone would be able to sneak in and discover their secret weapon. The Zeroth protection of the void was correct. Since you can send spies to the other side can naturally send spies as well. Don't be too complacent, forest goblins, Wuming warned. All in all, just be careful. I don't want this good show to be ruined. With that, Wuming stood up and prepared to leave. Thank you for the information, sir. Xianke bowed deeply to Wuming. However, her voluptuous chest swayed in front of Wuming's face. Cough cough. It's nothing. After all, I was very bored when I accidentally got lost in this world. How can I not find some entertainment for myself? I hope you won't disappoint me. With that, a black space appeared in front of Wuming. The space swallowed Wuming and the black door disappeared. It seemed that the other party relied on this thing to enter. Why didn't the comfortable version of shielding space teleportation work? Could it be that it wasn't space teleportation? Xianke began to think hard. However, this was none of Wuming's business. Phew! Wuming let out a long sigh. Seriously, I'm really not suited to play the bad guy. At this moment, Wuming leaned against a tree and rested. Suddenly, a golden light appeared on Wuming's arm and a clear voice said, Sir Wuming, you were lying to that young lady, right? Of course. I just went to the goblin's place to cover it up. You've been following me all this time. Other than the fact that the goblins have marrow explosion, everything else was a lie. Wuming smiled proudly. Including his easily angered and arrogant behavior, as well as the spy's information and his own goal, none of it could be said to be true. As for the fact that he couldn't use the Star Cup, Wuming hadn't even seen it before. Who knew if he could use it? In any case, Wuming had no intention of using the Star Cup. After all, the forest goblins have many wise people. Being able to create the Zeroth Ward of the Void and use a fake name, Xianke, is a wise person among wise people. If I don't tell her this, she probably won't believe me. Even if Wuming gave Xianke the impression that he was an easily angered, arrogant, rude, and vulgar god from another world, Xianke would still listen to him. After all, it was better to believe it than not. It would be troublesome if she failed miserably. I've done what I should. The rest will be left to Rick. What I should do now is to meet Artemisia. You're tuning in to the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.